When you stop controlling, life learns to flow. To get somewhere in this world, you must take charge, seize the reins. Tighten your grip on your thoughts, your behavior, your destiny. And yet, if you listen carefully, if you watch the world, not with the frantic eyes of striving, but with the soft gaze of awareness, you begin to notice something curious. Life, in its deepest nature, never moves by force. Clouds do not rearrange themselves because they believe they ought to be elsewhere. And yet somehow, everything gets done, everything unfolds, everything coheres. And so, I invite you now, just for this moment, just for this breath, to loosen the grip. The hum that says, you are part of something vast, intricate, and fundamentally unpredictable. To see this, we must begin where all illusions begin. The sense of a separate, isolated I that must defend itself against a world that appears foreign. You see, we are taught to think of ourselves as little pilots, sitting inside our heads, trying desperately to steer the machine of the body through a universe that operates independently of us. But this is a fiction. A very persuasive one, yes, but a fiction nonetheless. Your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, all of them rise and fall like waves emerging from a substance so much larger than the little ego that claims to author them. And once you begin to sense that, control starts to look very different. Control is the leaf trying to manage the wind. When you attempt to dominate life, you inevitably discover that life pushes back. It resists your resistance. But when you relax your grip, when you trust, even tentatively, that something deeper than your conscious will is guiding you, you discover that life begins to carry you, not always where you expected, but often where you needed to go. This is the fear at the root of our obsession with control. But consider the heart. It beats without your supervision. Consider your lungs. They fill and empty in a rhythm older than your first memory. Consider the countless processes in your body, cells dividing, nerves firing, blood flowing. You do none of it. You could not do any of it if you tried. And you have never been the one running the show. But there is a profound difference between action that arises from fear and compulsive control, and action that arises from harmony, action that springs from the same intelligence that moves the planets and opens a flower in the morning sun. Let me illustrate by way of a simple story. He sees the current moving swiftly and thinks, if I could only command this river, if I could force it to flow the way I want, then I would feel secure. And so he steps in, arms flailing, legs stiffening, trying to push the water aside. Panic, exhaustion, chaos. Instead of fighting the flow, she feels it. She lets the current carry her, and with gentle, minimal movements, she learns to navigate it. She is not passive. She is not lazy. She simply understands that working with the river is smarter than trying to overpower it. Which of these two is truly in control? You see, control in the egoic sense, tight, relentless, anxious, is not real control at all. It is the desperate flailing of someone who has mistaken themselves for the entirety of what is happening. But the deeper, wiser kind of control is what emerges when you align yourself with the flow instead of opposing it. This is why martial artists often speak of yielding, of using the opponent's energy rather than confronting it head-on. It is why musicians do not force their instruments, but become sensitive to the subtle dynamics of sound. It is why lovers do not manufacture affection, but surrender to the natural unfolding of intimacy. Control through force is brittle, but something peculiar happens when we cling too tightly. We try to control our emotions, and they grow stronger. We try to control others, and they resist or drift away. It is the paradox at the heart of the human struggle. This does not mean surrendering in despair. It means surrendering in trust. A trust that the same intelligence that grew your bones and shaped the galaxies can be relied upon to move your life in ways your mind cannot predict. And so I ask you, have you ever had a moment when you stopped trying so hard, when you relaxed for just a breath, and suddenly everything seemed to fall into place? A moment of insight, a moment of clarity, a moment when the world seemed to move effortlessly through you rather than against you. That is flow. You are here to participate in it gracefully, openly, playfully. If you stop gripping the steering wheel of existence with white knuckles, you discover that the road turns with or without your command. And so the great question becomes, what would your life be like if you allowed it to move? Not aimlessly, but naturally. Not blindly, but with trust. Not out of fear, but out of recognition that you belong to something far larger than your imagined control. The more deeply you feel this, the more clearly you see that letting go is not the opposite of action. It is the opposite of panic. It is the opposite of resistance. It is the opposite of clinging. Letting go is the beginning of true participation. And so, if letting go is the beginning of true participation, we must ask what exactly we are participating in. For the moment you release the compulsive need to control, you find yourself woven back into the fabric of the world, not a lonely thread, struggling for its own pattern, but part of a great tapestry that is forever unfolding. You begin to sense that life is not a problem you must solve, nor a chaotic force you must subdue, but a curious, ever-evolving dance. And you are not the choreographer standing above the stage. You are one of the dancers, discovering each movement as it comes. It is here that the first great softening occurs. You may notice it in small ways, perhaps, in the way you breathe, the way you walk, the way you speak. You find that the more you relax, the more natural everything becomes. The world, which once seemed heavy, begins to feel lighter. And in that lightness, you rediscover something you may have forgotten. Life does not demand that you be in control. Life simply invites you to be present. Let us look more closely at this presence, because it holds a subtle secret. When you are completely here listening, sensing, feeling without resistance, you are not controlling anything, and yet somehow everything becomes clear. You are aware not as a commander, but as a participant, as a witness who knows that witnessing itself is part of the great unfolding. Consider a musician improvising on a stage. If he tries to control every note, he tightens up, his fingers stiffen, his timing falters. But when he trusts the moment, when he allows the music to play through him, he becomes effortless. The notes arise as naturally as breath. He is not in control, yet everything flows. Or look at a painter facing a blank canvas. If she fears making a mistake, if she clings to an idea of perfection, her brush becomes hesitant. But when she surrenders to curiosity, when she lets her hand move before the mind can interfere, the painting emerges with a vitality she could never have planned. In such moments, the boundary between self and action dissolves. There is no I performing the act, there is only the act itself. Awareness and movement are one. This is the essence of flow. And flow does not come from force. It does not arise from domination. It appears when you yield, when you stop trying to push life into your preconceived shapes and instead allow life to reveal its own patterns. Yet yielding does not mean passivity. It means sensitivity. It means listening to the subtle movements of your own being and responding with the gentleness of someone who knows they are handling something sacred. But we often resist this. We resist because we are afraid of what might happen if we don't hold everything together. We fear that without our constant vigilance, the world will fall apart, or we will lose our worth, or the people around us will abandon us. And beneath all these fears is the deepest one of all, the fear of uncertainty. Uncertainty, the great phantom that haunts the modern mind. We imagine that certainty is safety. We imagine that if we could know exactly what will happen, or if we could plan thoroughly enough, we might secure ourselves against the unpredictable. Yet life has never operated by such guarantees. The beauty of a sunrise lies in the fact that it is never exactly the same twice. The charm of a conversation lies in the unexpected turns it might take. The wonder of falling in love lies precisely in the fact that we do not control it. Anything alive is uncertain. Anything vibrant is unpredictable. Anything meaningful is beyond your grasp. If your life were perfectly controlled, perfectly predictable, perfectly managed, it would not be a life at all, it would be a machine. And you, my friend, are not a machine. You are a mystery walking around in human form. You are a question the universe is asking, and your purpose is not to answer the question, but to be it. When you try to control life, you flatten it. You turn the mystery into a task, the spontaneity into a script, the richness into a checklist. You trade the infinite for the manageable. And yet how strange, no matter how much we try to simplify existence into something we can dominate, it always eludes us, like a soap bubble slipping through our fingers. It dances just beyond our grasp, inviting us not to seize it, but to marvel at it. Perhaps this is why laughter, genuine laughter, so often erupts when we finally let go. When you see how absurd it was to believe you could master life like a chessboard, something inside you loosens. A laughter resides not mocking, not cynical, but relieved. It is the laughter of someone who has realized that life is not a problem, but a performance. Not a battlefield, but a playground. And in that moment, your breath deepens. Your shoulders drop. You return to your natural rhythm. This rhythm is the flow of life itself. It is the pulse of the world beating through youth, the same pulse that animates the oceans, stirs the forests, and spins the stars. When you feel this pulse, control begins to look unnecessary. Not because you have become passive, but because you have become aligned. You move not by force, but by resonance. A bird does not control the air, it rides it. A sailor does not control the wind, he tacks with it. A dancer does not control the music, she lets it move her. And now comes the invitation for you. What would it mean to let life move you? Not to drag you, not to push you, not to force you, but to carry you the way the current carries a leaf. If you listen closely enough, if you allow yourself even a moment of stillness, you may feel something shifting. The need to push relaxes, the need to manipulate softens, the need to be anything other than what you are in this very moment dissipates like mist in the sun. And then, something miraculous happens. You begin to trust. Not blindly, not recklessly, not with naive optimism, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has sensed that the universe is not a hostile stranger, but an old companion. A companion that whispers, sometimes softly and sometimes fiercely, "Come. There is more to you than you know." You begin to understand that control is not the path to security. Presence is, attention is, awareness is. Once you taste this even for a moment, you see that letting go is not a loss, it is a return. A return to the way life has always been meant to flow. And as this return deepens, as you rediscover the rhythm that was always carrying you, you may notice a subtle but astonishing transformation. Life begins to feel less like something happening to you, and more like something happening through you. This shift is delicate, almost like awakening from a dream. One moment you feel bound to the old patterns, gripping, resisting, anticipating, and then, with one breath, one moment of clarity, the tightness loosens and you realize you were never meant to hold everything together. The universe has been holding you all along. Imagine, if you will, a bird perched on the thin branch of a tree. The branch sways in the wind, bending beneath its weight, dancing with the breeze. Yet the bird is untroubled. Why? Because it trusts not the branch, but its wings. It knows that whatever the wind does, whatever the tree does, it can respond not with fear, but with fluidity. To let go of control is to rediscover your wings. It does not mean you never fall. It means falling no longer feels like the end. It means uncertainty becomes spacious rather than terrifying. It means that the unknown, instead of threatening you, begins to allure you with its boundless possibilities. But to feel this shift, you must be willing to release one of the greatest illusions of all, the illusion that you are separate from the world you fear. Look closely. You will find no boundary where you end and life begins. The thoughts you call your own arise from a mind shaped by countless interactions, language, culture, relationships, memories. The breath you take is the exhalation of trees. The warmth in your skin is the gift of a star. You are a pattern within a larger pattern, a ripple inside an immense sea. Once you sense this, even faintly, you begin to see that controlling life is as futile as attempting to control your own heartbeat by sheer effort. Try it. You cannot. The moment you interfere, you only disrupt the natural cadence. And so the question becomes not how do I impose my will upon life, but how do I align myself with the currents that already move through everything. Alignment does not occur through force. It arises through listening. Listening not merely with the ears, but with the whole of your being to the subtle movements within and around you. The shifting of your emotions, the quiet impulses of intuition, the gentle nudges life gives through coincidence, synchronicity, sudden clarity. To listen in this way, you must soften. Soften your expectations. Soften your judgments. Soften the constant narration of the mind that insists it knows what should happen next. In that softening, the mind becomes like a calm pond. And just as a still pond reflects the world with pristine clarity, so a still mind reflects the truth of your life with astonishing simplicity. From this stillness arises a deeper kind of intelligence, one that does not analyze, but perceives, one that does not strategize, but understands, one that does not control, but participates. Think of the way your hand instinctively reaches out when something falls. You do not plan it, you do not command it. The action flows from a presence deeper than thought. Life, in this sense, is always moving with an intelligence far older than the ego, far wider than the narrow beam of conscious control. When you trust this deeper intelligence, decisions become clearer, not because you think harder, but because you think less. There's more space for things to reveal themselves, more room for truth to rise to the surface. And in this space, something profoundly healing begins to occur. You stop fighting yourself. All your life perhaps you have struggled against your own nature, trying to be what you thought you should be, trying to feel only certain emotions, trying to silence the parts of you that didn't fit the story of who you believed you ought to become. But when the need for control begins to fall away, you discover that your inner life is not an error to be corrected, but a landscape to be experienced. Emotions cease to be obstacles and become signals. Thoughts cease to be enemies and become visitors. Fears cease to be monsters and become teachers. It is a relief so deep that it touches your very bones. Because for the first time, perhaps in many years, you are no longer at war with the movement of your own life. In that peace, you become available to joy, to insight, to beauty, to spontaneity. Not the forced joy of pretending to be positive, but the natural joy that arises when the mind stops strangling the present moment. Not the forced beauty of trying to create the perfect life, but the beauty that emerges when you actually notice the life unfolding before you. It is as though colors become richer, sounds become clearer, and even the most ordinary moments shimmer with a quiet vibrancy. Washing dishes becomes a meditation. Sitting in traffic becomes an opportunity for awareness. Speaking with a stranger feels like touching a mystery. This is what it means for life to learn to flow. Flow is not something you create. It is something you uncover by removing the tension of control that blocks it. The more you resist the flow, the more turbulent everything becomes. But the moment you release the resistance, the movement smooths out like a river passing through open land. There is a story, told in many forms, about a man who spent his life chasing after enlightenment. He sought teachers, practiced rituals, disciplined his mind, and forced his body through austere regimens. But no matter how hard he worked, enlightenment eluded him. Until one day, exhausted, he sat by a quiet stream and watched a leaf drifting by. He noticed that the leaf did nothing. It did not push the water. It did not resist the stones. It simply floated, sometimes caught in a swirl, sometimes speeding along, sometimes pausing in an eddy. And in that moment, he realized that enlightenment was not a destination but a surrender. It was not something he could achieve through effort, but something that unfolded when he ceased trying to control the experience of being alive. You see, the wisdom of the universe often speaks in whispers. In the rustling of leaves, in the drifting of clouds, in the ebb and flow of the tide, but we cannot hear it when our minds are cluttered with the noise of control. To hear it, we must become quiet. And in that quiet, we find a truth so simple that it almost seems unbelievable. Life has always known what it was doing. It is we who forgot how to listen. And once you begin to listen truly, you discover that life is not pushing you, nor testing you, nor waiting for you to prove yourself worthy. Life is simply expressing itself through you, as effortlessly as it expresses itself through the wind that moves the grass or the waves that curl upon the shore. What makes it seem otherwise is the tension of control, the self-imposed demand that you must constantly shape every moment into the image of what you believe it should be. But when this demand softens, even slightly, your experience shifts from strain to curiosity. The world becomes less of a battlefield and more of a field of play. Consider a small child running through a meadow. She does not plan her steps. She does not calculate her joy. She does not strategize how to love the moment. She simply runs, and in running becomes the moment itself. And because she is not trying to control her experience, the experience is free to astonish her. You were once that child. In some way, you still are. The wisdom of letting go is not a new skill you must acquire. It is a remembering the natural ease you lived with before the mind grew heavy with expectations and fears. It is returning to a kind of innocence, but this time an innocence informed by the depth of all you have lived through. A wise innocence, a luminous softness, a clarity that comes not from knowing more, but from holding less. As you release the tightening that once governed your life, something extraordinary begins to happen. You become available to the intelligence of each moment. You begin to sense when to act and when to wait. You begin to feel the subtle shifts of timing, the natural rhythm of your own unfolding. This is not passivity. It is precision. When you are no longer clouded by fear, your actions arise with clean intention. They are not forced, they are fitting. They emerge not from the need to control life, but from the harmony of moving with it. A sailor trims his sails not by conquering the wind, but by adjusting to it. A calligrapher creates beauty not by forcing the brush, but by letting the hand follow the stroke. A listener understands another not by controlling the conversation, but by opening to it. You begin to move with this mysterious precision when you let go of control. You act when action feels alive. You rest when rest is natural. You speak when words flow. You listen when silence deepens. And through this gentle alignment, life begins to feel increasingly trustworthy. Not predictable, trustworthy, because predictability is a dull imitation of trust. Predictability says, I know exactly what will happen. Trust says, whatever happens, I can move with it. Predictability demands control. Trust allows freedom. Many people spend their lives trying to make the world predictable. They cling to rigid routines, fixed identities, tightly guarded expectations. But the world refuses to flatten itself into their plans, and so they live in constant conflict with life's untamable nature. But when trust replaces control, the entire relationship shifts. You begin to feel the way a surfer feels when riding a wave, completely uncertain and utterly alive. For the wave is never still, never guaranteed, never under your command. And yet the ride is possible, beautifully possible, when you meet the wave with presence rather than force. Life is much the same. The wave rises and falls. Your circumstances rise and fall. Relationships rise and fall. Your emotions rise and fall. Trying to control these movements is like trying to nail the ocean to the shore. But trusting them, moving with them, allows you to discover a grace you could not have manufactured even with the finest plans. You may notice that when you loosen the grip, even the difficult moments become more bearable. Not because they disappear, but because resistance no longer amplifies them. Pain becomes simply pain, not the pain piled upon by the mind's narrative of fear and resistance. Sadness becomes simply sadness, not the sadness inflated by the desperate wish that it would go away. When you stop trying to control your inner world becomes less threatening. The storm may still come, but you are no longer standing rigid against it. You become like the tall grass and the wind, bending, bowing, moving, but never breaking. This is the essence of resilience, not the ability to control life, but the ability to move with it. At first, this movement may feel unfamiliar, even frightening. After all, the mind has spent years believing that control equals safety. To loosen that grip can feel like stepping into emptiness. But if you continue to listen, if you give yourself permission to trust, even for a moment, you begin to discover that what felt like emptiness is actually openness. And openness is where life enters. Imagine a tightly clenched fist. It can grasp, but it cannot receive. It can hold on to a few small things, but it cannot open itself to anything new. It cannot feel the breeze passing through the fingers. It cannot offer or accept a touch. Now picture an open hand. This open hand symbolizes the shift from control to flow. It is receptive, flexible, responsive. It holds nothing, yet is capable of holding everything. It is vulnerable, yes, but in that vulnerability lies its strength. For it is not rigid, it does not crack, it does not resist the world. It responds to it. When you let go of control, you become like this open hand. You stop clinging to the fixed idea of who you must be, what must happen, how life should unfold. And in that letting go, you discover that the world can finally meet you, as naturally as a breeze meets an open palm. Yet perhaps the most surprising discovery is this. The things you were trying hardest to control often begin to take care of themselves when you stop interfering. You may find that relationships become easier when you stop trying to manage them. Creativity flows when you stop forcing inspiration. Decisions clarify when you stop demanding certainty. Even the body relaxes when the mind stops its ceaseless attempts to dominate every sensation. This is the quiet magic of life, learning to flow. It is not dramatic. It is not flashy. It does not announce itself with trumpets. It reveals itself in the small, subtle shifts like the long exhale after years of shallow breathing, or the moment the mind falls silent without being asked. And in those subtle shifts, you sense a presence that has been with you all along, waiting for you to stop trying so hard. A presence that whispers, "You can rest now. You can trust. You can let me carry you." And as you rest in that whisper, something profound begins to dawn on you. The universe was never asking for your control, only your cooperation. Only your willingness to move with the tide instead of against it. Only your openness to the mystery that has been unfolding through you since the moment you took your first breath. This cooperation is not obedience. It is partnership. You are not surrendering to a tyrant, but returning to your natural rhythm. A rhythm older than your fears, older than your ambitions, older than the stories you learned to tell yourself about who you should become. For beneath all those stories lies a quiet, radiant awareness, a kind of spaciousness that is untouched by the rise and fall of circumstances. It is the part of you that has always known how to breathe without instruction, how to heal without command, how to love without approval. This awareness does not try to control life because it is life. It is the pulse behind your pulse, the silence beneath your thoughts, the stillness in which every movement appears and dissolves. To live from this awareness is to recognize that life is not something separate from you. There is no you on one side and life on the other. There is no observer apart from the observed. There is no dancer apart from the dance. There is only this moment, this unfolding, this ever-changing, ever-flowing expression of existence. And when you stop trying to stand outside of it, when you stop trying to grip it like an object you must manage, you find yourself inside the flow. Not as a passive bystander, but as a living expression of it. This is the great return. The return to being, the return to simplicity, the return to the natural intelligence of existence. You may find, as this return deepens, that even your sense of time begins to shift. Anxiety loosens because anxiety lives in the future. Regret loosens because regret lives in the past. And control lives in the impossible attempt to manage both. But the present moment is not something you can control. It is something you can only enter. And the astonishing truth is that the present moment has always welcomed you, even when you were too busy to notice. It sits here patiently, like an old friend waiting with a gentle smile, saying, "Come in, rest, you belong here." And when you step fully into the present, when you allow yourself to be exactly where you are without demanding that anything be different, you discover that the moment itself provides what you need. Not always what you want, perhaps, but what you need to take the next step with clarity and ease. This is the real flow of life. Not a life free of difficulty, but a life free of the struggle against difficulty. Not a life without storms, but a life in which the storms no longer drown you, because you have learned to float. Floating is one of the most beautiful metaphors for letting go. If you fight the water, if you thrash, resist, panic, you sink. But if you relax, if you trust the buoyancy of your own body and the support of the water beneath you, you rise. The water hasn't changed. Your relationship with it has. And so it is with life. The circumstances may remain the same, but when the inner resistance falls away, the same currents that once felt overwhelming now carry you with surprising gentleness. You begin to see that you are never trying to control life itself, only your fear of life, only the discomfort of uncertainty, only the vulnerability of being open. But when fear is met with presence instead of resistance, it dissolves, it softens. It reveals that beneath its surface was not a threat, but a longing for connection, for understanding, for trust. Fear, in its deepest essence, is simply the part of you that forgot it belonged. When you stop controlling, fear loses its grip. When you stop controlling, love becomes possible again. When you stop controlling, creativity returns like a long-lost friend. When you stop controlling, even your pain becomes a doorway rather than a prison. And slowly, gently, a new way of living emerges. A way in which you rise each morning, not with the burden of managing the universe, but with the openness to meet it. A way in which you act not from compulsion or panic, but from clarity. A way in which the world no longer appears full of enemies and obstacles, but of invitations, each one calling you deeper into the experience of being fully alive. You may notice that life begins to feel more spacious, less like a narrow corridor you must navigate carefully, and more like an open landscape filled with possibilities. Decisions, once heavy with pressure, become choices. Relationships once choked by expectations become living connections. Even silence becomes rich and comforting, rather than uncomfortable or empty. This spaciousness is not something you create. It is something that appears when control fades. The mind becomes less cluttered, the heart becomes less armored, and the body becomes less tense. You begin to feel the world again, not as something separate from you, but as something intimately felt. like the breath in your lungs or the pulse beneath your skin. You start to move through life with a kind of quiet elegance. Not because you are trying to be graceful, but because grace arises naturally from the absence of strain. And gradually, you realize that letting go is not something you do once. It is a living practice, a moment-to-moment invitation, a gentle returning to your own innate wisdom. Every breath becomes an opportunity to release what does not need to be held. Every step becomes an opportunity to trust the ground beneath you. And then, perhaps when you least expect it, there comes a moment-to-moment so simple, so unremarkable on the surface that something within you shifts permanently. A moment in which you see with absolute clarity that life has always been moving with its own mysterious intelligence, and that your attempts to control it were like trying to improve the workings of the sun or the tides. In that moment, words fall away, explanation falls away, the need to grasp falls away. There is only the flow, and you are in it. You are it. This is the quiet revelation at the heart of letting go. Nothing was ever separate. Nothing was ever disconnected. You were always part of the great movement. You simply forgot. And now, with a soft breath, you remember. Let life flow. Let yourself flow within it. And discover, again and again, the profound ease of being carried by the rhythm that has always held you.